I'm Evan,
I'm Steve.
and we're here. We're going to be talking a little bit more about COVID, some potential solutions. Maybe we'll get a little bit into our difference on the mask debate. Maybe not, but we kind of might want to anyway because, we really do have differing points of view, even if I can't really defend my side of things from a purely scientific stance like old Craig could. Still might be worth getting into. But that being said, why don't you give a real basic introduction of yourself?
Well, I'm uh, man. Where do I start? I've basically been bored most of my life, so I usually have a tendency to go pursue interesting new hobbies and careers. I've got a background as an EMT. Did that for volunteer work for a while. I do search and rescue on the side. My education is as a chemical engineer. I also have a degree in psychology. I currently work as a nuclear engineer at a national lab. I've worked at two nuclear facilities in the past, once as a chem tech and once as a cook. So, the cook was really where the strong nuclear experience comes in. But that's kind of a brief overview of who and what I am. I like the outdoors. I'm sitting here, arm in a sling and cast type thing because I dislocated my radius and or broke it while out on the trail
Yeah, I saw the
and had
pictures,
a
man. That looks really rough.
it was pretty fantastic. I earned my man points, right? It was 2 miles that I had to sit there hiking, holding my wrist through the Adirondacks to get to a ranger station where they splinted it. Another 4 miles to the extraction. I was very happy with that.
Bravo, bravo! You have absolutely you've got an extra chit on your man card from that one.
That's exactly right. I told my wife that you get one man point for every mile that you traverse with a non-functional limb.
Yeah, that's pretty much worth both of your temples going gray, while the rest of your hair just stays the same color.
Right? Yes. Totally agree.
Yeah,
But yeah,
absolutely.
that's kind of where my experience is and what I've done and what I do for fun. Break myself.
Oh, cool. Well, cool that you have made it through without um, you know unsurviving. So
Eh, it was a minor flesh wound.
good, good. Better the minor ones than the major ones.
That's true.
So let's kind of chat about COVID. Since you haven't really had a
Okay.
chance to catch up on where we've been up until now, largely what we've been discussing is safety precautions and like kind of the scene around things, and then we went off on a tangent last week about material science, but that'll happen. So that being what it is, we'll just kind of jump into something a little bit different, and we'll talk about
Okay.
curatives, as it were, treatments. What's here, what's upcoming, and things along that line. So, with that out the gate, and since we want to keep people interested, let's just go ahead and drop the nuclear bomb and talk about hydroxychloroquine.
Ah, yes. The most political of treatments.
It is. It
I
is.
I haven't. So I'll be honest. I tend to sit strongly with the I want to see really good evidence of something before we start rolling it out as policy, and I haven't seen like a gold standard for hydroxychloroquine use. But I've also seen plenty of information that really strongly suggests that it probably works,
Yeah. There's a
right? But it only works in an early stage, and it only works,
yeah. There's a
you know.
bevy of anecdotal evidence, and then there are studies with good numbers
Yep.
that you know they lead a body to think that there is something here. And
But I think the weird part, right, is that along with all of that stuff, you also have the studies that had to be retracted
oh
because they
yeah, yeah.
faked their data. Like that's really weird. Like, what's wrong with people?
And the curious thing about that, not to delve too deep into the politics side of things here, but we were discussing this a moment before the show, and you can trace a lot of bad actors and their money.
Yep.
So think about this: you've got a relatively inexpensive treatment, actually, in the grand scheme of things, a very inexpensive treatment that can be rolled out easily and quickly and inexpensively. This is kind of a holy trinity here of medicine. You can't really ask for much better than that. And then you've got these other drugs that may work. The early testing is promising, but this is early testing, and this is brand new stuff out of nowhere, and these are brand new products that, well, they need testing of their own for maybe other reasons too. And these new products are not cheap. They're not cheap
Nope.
at all. And you've got to pay for those development costs. As I was talking with Craig the other week, you know, you got to make the money flow when the money's not flowing. So, like the hospitals, when they had to make sure that the money kept flowing, well, maybe a death comes up COVID here and there so that the
Yep.
government bucks come in. Well, maybe a cure comes up COVID so that the private bucks come in.
Well, you look at like the COVID death case thing, right? They actually get a significant payout for declaring somebody a COVID death versus a non-COVID death,
Yeah, absolutely.
right? That's like what is it, 40,000, 50,000, somewhere in that ballpark?
I
I've
don't know
heard
the
different
specific
people toss
numbers.
out different numbers, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. And so, what a surprise! You get paid, several times what you'd get for an emergency call or something like that. But yeah, I don't know. I think that when you're starting to talk about hydroxychloroquine, I think it's really interesting. I think it's promising, and I don't see a reason not to use it. I think the biggest issue that we'd have is starting to like mass manufacture it as a treatment, right? Because it is so cheap. So there hasn't been a significant margin. Like we have a stockpile for treating malaria, which we don't really have as a problem in this country. So that could be an issue. But
Yeah,
we
that's
can also
largely
come
it.
around that.
And that was actually, interestingly enough, one of the early arguments a lot of the talking heads and pundits had is, we don't want to take this medicine away from people with lupus or people with, malaria issues. And like, well, first of all, the malaria issues are kind of a complete non-starter and moot point. We're not in Africa here, people.
Right.
And beyond that, okay, you do make a bit of a valid point, but once you've got the initial roll up, the things are basically handled. You do need to then figure out your infrastructure, just like we've had to do with paper and toilet paper, for instance. It disappeared for a while because the industry was basically split in two. You've got, what would you say? You've got your private usage, like your homes, your, well, anything that's going to be your private usage, like a home, a small business, something like that. And then you've got your industrial and business that are going to be buying these things that are packaged in completely different ways and made largely in different ways, too,
Hmm.
because it's made to hit a very specific margin. And kind of in doing that, you're not going to have a fancy package. You're going to have, you might have a quality product, but it's going to be in like basically a paper bag. And there's no way to market that to a consumer. And the whole infrastructure is built around things being a specific size and shape, too. So there was no real way to rejig it. So we've just kind of had to wing it. Now, we've done pretty well, all things considered. But, that's where a lot of trouble came in because things were built around servicing an industry that basically collapsed, the service industry.
Hmm.
And so a lot of that has had to be somewhat retooled, and supply lines and infrastructure setups have had to be modified and tweaked.
Well, I mean, and that's always like you start talking pipelines, whatever it is that you want to develop, it's going to take anywhere between 3 to 6 months in general to get a reasonable supply out.
Yeah.
And even then, that's not going to be, we can treat everybody all at once kind of thing. So I think that's, retooling is useful, but it's a little bit harder in drug manufacture to do that. Especially, it all depends on how they produce it. I'm actually in the process of trying to look up the how they produce it. But if you're doing something like mammalian cells that are producing it, how we generally do insulin, you basically are brewing it like you brew a beer, but then you have to do all these purification stages. And so it can take months to get a significant quantity because it's all purifying this stuff out. You start talking about something that's, a salt type reaction, what you see with like methamphetamine, or well, I don't want to call it methamphetamines because that's got a bad thing, but the amphetamine class of compounds or something like that, those are a little bit easier to do. We can just basically mix those in a batch, purify them out, and we don't have to do any of the protein or the resin compounds that we do have to use for the other stuff. So there is some legitimate concerns when you start talking about drugs, but when you start talking about like physical facilities and machinery for and you hit on the masks, those are a lot harder to pull off.
Yeah, well, that's completely understandable. So let me see here. I've got my. I'm going back to my thread that I made. Geez, starting February 3rd, actually. I've got another one that was on the lead up to the outbreak, but in that I've been trying to follow things. So there was one I'd actually like to bring up with you if I can find this here.
Sure.
There's a company. I want to say they're out of Texas, but I could be wrong. But they essentially they exist as a rapid rollout facility. Okay. Clover Biopharmaceuticals. No,
there's actually a lot of those.
Yeah, apparently that was a thing that was developed in and around the time of the Ebola outbreak, I think, that they were trying to basically set up. These were DoD funded, I believe. I want to say laboratories that are basically made to just rapidly roll out anything that can come together.
I thought they were, yeah, and there were some people that were like, hey, we're going to out by June, which they didn't succeed.
Okay, I may have found the article. If I have, I'll be happy to link it to you. Because it's... no, this isn't exactly the one. That's unfortunate, but I'll just keep looking for it on here. But another important one that actually I would like to get a comment from you on is phage therapy. Are you familiar?
Phage therapy?
Yeah.
Not off the top of my head, no. I've actually never heard of that.
Well, I was going over it last week with everybody. I'll give you the brief once over. During World War II, we had, I believe that was when we had the development of penicillin, I want to say.
Yeah.
And at the same time, they did not have an analogous or even close to analogous product over there. On the other side of the Iron Curtain, or other side of the axis, whatever you want to call it. So they, lacking that, went to another form. Now, phage is actually a thing, a living thing.
Yeah, it's a virus.
Yeah, a bacteriophage.
Yeah,
and they live to target essentially bacteria, and they were used as. What was it? I'd have to look it up because it's a really interesting story. But basically, like, somebody found some pond water that whenever you would never get sick when you got in it or something like that. But then they found the bacteriophages in there and found that they attacked specific, toxic, not toxic agents, but specific bacteria. See, I'm so outside of my depth here that I'm probably not doing this adequate justice.
No, but... I pulled something up. I'm reading up on it. It looks like back in the day it was it was considered a means of treating infections without antibiotics, and now we're looking to revisit that. But I'm not sure how that would help with COVID, right? Like,
well, you would
COVID's
think it wouldn't.
But
the reason that I mention that is there is specifically a genetically engineered phage that was made to fight SARS. And
really?
Yes, which they don't fight viruses. They don't attack viruses. They go after bacteria. It's not something they do, so it had to be changed. But there was one that was changed to deal specifically with SARS. So I haven't really heard any movement on that. And I'll get you a link for that. And when I find the link, I'll also leave it in the comments below for anybody that's interested in following up on that as well.
I think I got it. I'll toss that in the comments.
Oh, okay.
That may be it. That looks to be what they're looking for COVID. So
Hmm.
I
Yeah,
will
this is one.
browse this quickly.
Yeah, it's neat stuff. But
Yeah.
there was a phage that was developed. They used that and just a normal antiviral drug therapy, and they were able to have really excellent results.
Okay. So basically, what they're arguing is that you could. So again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, with like they could probably grow bacteria, right?
Hmm.
And then instead of having to have some sort of insertion into the DNA of the plasmid where the bacteria produce the protein, they could instead do something where they modify the phages to dump them into a bacterial culture, and the phages would have insert their genetics, and along with replication, they would also have specific proteins for that they could purify out. That's an interesting concept. It's a very unique way to do it, rather than having to do like metabolic pathways or some of the other
Oh yeah,
more
it's a
difficult things.
very left field kind of attack on things.
Yeah, yeah,
And
that's actually kind of cool.
another angle of attack is always best because that keeps your viruses and things from being able to really adapt. That's why we've got superbugs, because we've been using the same thing over and over and over, and it adapts.
Well, I think when you talk about like COVID, one of the things that actually is a
You there?
reporting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you said one of the things.
Oh yeah, sorry. Looks like my mic cut out. Yeah, one of the things that I'm kind of concerned about with COVID is it seems that resistance doesn't last for a very long time. So we've kind of sunk most of our eggs into the basket of a vaccine. And there seem to be legitimate questions as to the utility of that vaccine, because it's looking like maybe I think the CDC released something a few weeks ago saying that we've got 3 months of immunity, and that's about what you're good for. So in order to wipe it out, you basically need to forcefully vaccinate every single person on like the same day or within a couple weeks of one another. Otherwise, you're going to have a resident population. If you figure 28 days for the cases that are currently present, and dealing with new infections, it would be almost impossible to get that to work. And if there's even one carrier, the whole strain starts up again. So I'm kind of concerned about vaccines for that. Doing alternative techniques to find a way around it is actually a really great idea.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, again, every angle that you've got is just another angle of attack on a viciously deadly foe.
Yep. Well, I'm not so sure about
Maybe
that.
not
It's
viciously deadly, but I mean, it is quite dangerous. And on that note, I imagine we do tangents on here, so screw it.
it's
Right.
okay.
So on that note, I imagine you saw the information out a few days ago on the how the numbers have been kind of weird with that.
I didn't see anything
Ah,
specific
here,
on
I've
that,
got
but
it.
it's actually something
I'll
I've kind of
link
noticed.
you the Times article. Uh, just to give a
I'll,
brief once over, I'll just read from this. It's Apruva Mandavili for a reporter at the Times. I'll just give you a quick once over of her thread. But starting out here, all these months in the pandemic, we may have been testing the wrong way. Data from some state labs suggests up to 90% of people who get a positive result are no longer contagious and don't need to isolate. The long and short of it is the testing they're using is going to a further and higher iteration than you would normally go to get these results. Basically, they're getting into great deals of specificity where they really might not need to. And it's maybe making our numbers a lot bigger than they ought to be.
well, that's not really a surprise, and I think I want to touch on the numbers. So one of the things that ends up happening is a lot of people get wrapped up in numbers, and especially people who aren't used to dealing with numbers, like with a media organization or with social media, they don't have the context. Our numbers for COVID are actually not that bad. Ignoring the potential spike in cases from literally paying hospitals to have them, um, you compare this to like H1N1. H1N1 had a much higher infection rate and much higher death. So what we're talking about numbers wise is we're not really looking at particularly severe numbers for U.S. cases. Not in terms of deaths, but we are looking at very high infection rates for U.S. cases. I mean,
Oh yeah,
I
the numbers of
suspect.
infected are potentially in the millions currently.
Well, and you go back, one of the things that I live in New York State, so full disclaimer, I come from a very biased perspective that is New York, because New York is its own bias. So Cuomo comes out,
Undoubtedly.
and Cuomo's sitting there and talking about all these great things that they did. Well, you take a look at serum tests done on April 17th, which is like 2 or 3 days past New York City's peak, and something like 25% of New York City residents likely already had the virus, and yet there's only some 20,000 cases that were actually affected. The reality is, you start talking about places like New York City. New York City numbers, they probably already hit herd immunity, right? The reason that you're not seeing these big numbers from New York anymore is probably not because that New York's got this great hold on how to handle an infection, but probably more to do with the fact that everybody's already been infected and it's already gone through the system. Except for those of us who are upstate, right? Like, we live in more remote regions where much less likely to have had it. But yeah, no, I suspect that our numbers are looking really weird, because it looks like we have these just huge numbers of people getting infected and very few people who are actually getting any symptoms.
Yeah. Well, the oh, what is it? What's the word I'm looking for? The asymptomatic cases is
Yep.
there's a great deal of those, and in addition, there's a lot of weirdness with the asymptomatic cases. Like
Yep.
there's a doctor I've been following. He's out of Japan. That he's a neuroscientist, and he's been really following some of that with the potential neurological knock-on effects of this, and the things that it could maybe do to an unhinged mind. I mean, it really makes one wonder if perhaps the craziness around the world right now might be kind of incensed a little bit by this awful fucking thing.
Well, I mean, you take a whole bunch of people, you trap them in, essentially put them in lockdown, and you socially isolate.
Well, I mean,
You're going to have some problems.
above and beyond just the quarantine and everything, like actual neurological effects from the virus, and possibly with asymptomatic carriers. Maybe it was that little bit that was able to destabilize an otherwise stable mind and make them maybe do something that they otherwise wouldn't. Because people are being a lot crazier than you might expect.
I don't know.
It's a thought, anyway. I'd like to have the guy
I think
on
we're
and
looking
actually
at
talk
cabin
about it.
fever, right?
Oh yeah, undoubtedly. Like, one way or the other, people are tired of being cooped up. They
Right.
absolutely are. I mean, and there's people that have lost their jobs, they've lost their livelihoods, and
Yep.
it's a weird time, man. It's a weird, kind of ugly time. And it
Apparently,
doesn't
one
need
of
to be.
one of our friends believes it's end of days. I think that's a little bit extreme there, but
You
um,
can't see my eyes, but they are looking at the back of my skull right now.
I was like, you've got to be kidding me. But I mean, like, there's two parts to this. Again, context matters, right? We live in an age of unprecedented, rapid information dispersal. We also live in an age of absolutely unprecedented lack of filtration of information. So
Yeah.
what's ended up happening is, and I think when we start talking about whether it's COVID or something like that, the craziness that we see, cabin fever aside, that's kind of an inevitability. And if you go into some of the psych research on like social media and the damage that it does to your psyche, it's absolutely massive. So what we have is not just false information going out, but certainly hyperbolic information, and it's going out on all channels, because the people who are on social media who are getting the most attention are the ones that are pushing kind of the boundaries of what is socially acceptable. And then on top of that, you're also dealing with media organizations which are competing, the old media organizations which are competing with new media organizations. And the new media organizations may not have the same quality control as the old media organizations. So the new media organizations are growing because they're kind of hyping things up. And now our old media organizations are hyping things up just to compete. So I think one of the reasons that we're seeing this kind of degradation of essentially the social contract and civility between people is just because our brains are not capable of handling and processing this much information, this hyperbolic, this fast.
You almost need to be a little autistic.
Probably.
So I wonder, is that the next step in evolution?
I believe so. Speaking as a member of the specially gifted.
Uh, a body can. You have to learn. You have to learn. It's not, humans aren't really built for this, and you have to learn to deal with
No.
it. It's kind of like guns. They're fine, but you have to understand what you're dealing with, because if you don't and you're disrespectful of it, it can you should dry up.
Well, I think that's the case for everything, right? Like started with a little bit of a discussion on my arm, but I've been doing search and rescue and been kind of geared up for this kind of an injury in other people for a very long time, so I know how to handle it. And that kind of training, it's the difference between having a complete breakdown, right? If I was not as trained as I was, being out there 2 miles from the nearest ranger station and 6 miles from an extraction point, I might have actually like made the situation a hell of a lot worse. Split up the group, that I was hiking with to go chase stuff down. We might have had more people panic and had more injuries and all of these other things. And the same thing's true when you start talking about non-physical situations, when you're talking about psychological situations. Because if you're not trained in how to deal with how information is coming in and how to process that information and what to look for, you can easily get spun up and go off in a direction reacting to something that you shouldn't.
Yeah, the wisest thing anyone can do when interacting with social media is give everything time. Give it a day, unless it is, something that is directly going to cause you physical harm or, what shall we say, loss of some kind. I mean, if it's not a direct threat to you of some kind, give it a day for things to clarify. Maybe give a take that's a little less spicy, and just let the really crazy stuff kind of mellow a moment. As there's an adage, you'll know this, you'll appreciate it. If you're trying to save a drowning person, you've got to keep them as far away from you as possible, because
Yep.
you run a very real risk of them pulling you down.
Reach, throw, row, go. Yeah, no, I think that's one of the things that was true on social media. I've tried not to be as active on it. I'm getting kind of sick and tired of Twitter. My feed has, between whoever has blocked me, right, which is a good portion of the political spectrum. The remaining stuff is just either the same exact iteration on the exact same point, or B, completely useless, rambling garbage. But you start talking about Twitter and some of the things that were coming out. Take a look at all the scandals that we've been dealing politically, right? And I know you don't want to dive into politics. I'm trying to respect that.
No,
But you start talking about the stuff that comes out for information, these bombshell reports. This stuff is what's going to take Trump down. You wait, within 6 hours, typically, there's been corrections, modifications, walkbacks of the original statement that created this huge Twitter storm.
Well,
And that's I think
that,
the lesson.
Too, we can take that the other direction as well, and we can look at the people that have been waiting and waiting and waiting for the prosecution to drop. It's going to drop today. Barr's going to do it today. These were the same.
Oh no, he's not going to do it today. Let's be entirely honest. That's going to come out like October 1st or 2nd. So by the time they get through that whole process, now they're going to hold back on that until it's an ideal time to drop it.
Oh,
I have no doubt of that.
Pretty much anything that's happening big in politics right now is all a matter of timing. I mean, we're at the end of August. We're 2 months out from the presidential elections that could be argued to be one of the most important of our lifetimes. And everything's crazy and a little weird. So It's kind
It's
of
also a little
important.
bit slow. Like you take a look at
Yeah, yeah, the
the stuff that
world
we're getting
doesn't
out.
actually run at internet speed.
Nope,
Nothing actually
no.
does. The internet
But
is very weird and way too fast.
you take a look at the rate at which information has been over the last 4 years, and you take a look at the rate of information as it's been dispersed in the last 3 months, and the big stories have not dropped. There's just not much change in our day to day, like what's coming out. Hey, this might be a good thing for COVID. This might be a bad thing for Black Lives Matter. This might be a good thing for this group over here. But there's not a lot of significant world changing stuff. You take a look back to January, and we were dealing with what was it? What was that whole trial thing that they were doing? The impeachment trial, right? Like
All
it was
right.
nonstop, day after day, information bombs, and now we're dealing with none of it. Very, very quiet. So this is the quiet before the storm.
One hopes. One hopes. Or I would be even more hopeful if they were just going to stay quiet, but it's not. It's not. It's just going to. Certain things are going to ramp up. I certainly hope violence is not one of them, but I have my concerns there as well. But that's just kind of people being people. They are oftentimes easily led, and oftentimes they're easily led to things that are not good for them.
I mean, that's unfortunate, but true. Like we don't spend a lot of time teaching people to do critical thinking in schools anymore. I don't know. At least I hear the older generation certainly say that, and I think there's some truth to that because you look at what kids are getting through their school system. We're not getting that critical analysis anymore. We're not talking about logical fallacies. We're not talking about we're not installing good bullshit filters in our kids, and
Absolutely
I think
not. Well, a lot of that has
that's
come
cascading
from,
out.
how shall we say, it's come one from helicopter parents and two from these organizations that have gone as I don't know exactly how to put this into a small statement, so I guess I can't really. So the way that things have been set up to kind of create a generation of entitled people where everybody's given a trophy, everybody wins, everybody's validated, some things just aren't valid. There are people that need help. And something I like to say is it is great to be weird. Being weird is really cool. And not being normal is actually fine. Because let's say you're not normal in one fashion, you're a member of a population group that's, let us say, roughly 0.3% of the world population. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Be weird, be you. But just remember, you're not normal, but that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Just,
Well,
you know,
I think the what you're going for is we've gone somehow from let a kid be a kid to let's let childhood fantasies play out as reality, and that's kind of where
and
we're running into trouble.
across the board,
Yeah,
I don't
across
mean
the
this
board.
in just like one avenue, which I imagine people are kind of reading that into it. And I'm really trying to be broad with this because it really is a broad problem. It's
Yes.
infected so many of our deathly important institutions that hold up society. And people have to be disabused of these notions because they're dysgenic.
Well, you start talking about like some of those failures. I know you referenced the 0.3% there, but coming from a psych background, why did I leave psychology? They have a replication crisis, and it was abundantly
Hold
clear
on,
when I was going
we
through.
got a bit of a breakup there. You said a replicatability crisis, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
Sorry,
you
just
start
finishing out.
talking
You
about.
broke up there. Go ahead.
Sorry about that. Yeah, the my I hate my Corsair headset.
No,
It's
you're good.
terrible.
You're good. Just
It's
wanted to make
awful.
sure that comes through because that's actually an important term. People should probably remember that
Right.
replicatability.
So we start talking about where these problems are coming up, and normal people are kind of getting exposed to something that has been talked about, certainly amongst engineering circles and the physical science circles, but we have a replication crisis. And this is the issue that we're having, is this what's real and what's not. And we're actually having it in our sciences as well.
Well, a perfect
So,
example of that is the oh, I can't remember the name of the group, but they put out basically some studies that were just garbage, complete garbage, just gobbledygook. One of them was even they had taken parts of Mein Kampf and replaced Jew with like
oh
white
yeah,
man or
yeah, yeah.
something,
Love
and
that.
then it passed the immediate muster. It never got peer reviewed and was just published. Just
Well, and they aren't the first ones to do this, by the way, right? There was actually a French guy circa 2000 was the premier hoaxer, and he did the same thing. Although he didn't actually science journals, he went for like a literary review, and his was like, gravity is racist and all this other stuff in French. So most Americans didn't read it, but unless you're into the replication crisis and you're kind of following that, yeah, you're absolutely right. These things are brand new things that we're trying to have to deal with, and the effect of the institutions, because we're telling everybody that their thoughts, their feelings are valuable, and that's just not true. Not every thought has value. Not every idea is good.
well,
And we need to deal with
that's
that.
not necessarily the best way of putting it. It isn't to say that they're not valuable. It is to say that they are not useful. They have a value of their own. I mean, a fantasy has a value. It gives you some respite from something. On that note, don't take people's fantasies from them, by the by. But
I mean, that's
having
that's
your fantasies is great and it's fine. But keep in mind they're yours.
well, I think when I sit there and I use a term like value, right? I put it from the perspective not necessarily of the individual concept, but how you apply it. Right? If you live in a fantasy, it's definitely not value added, right? But if you
No.
use a fantasy for personal escape, then it's just using a fantasy for personal escape, and that has value.
Yeah.
So I don't think that I would actually, walk back the statement as much, because not everything does have actual value. How we use certain things does.
Certainly.
But and that's you
Like
start talking about.
I've never woven a basket underwater, but that might be something that someone finds a great value in.
I'm sure there is some. That used to be the example my dad used to me when he started talking about.
Yeah, all of this silliness. Uh, but I mean, that's something that anybody can get behind. I mean, there are useful degrees, and there is a use for sociology, for that matter, which is, yes, the obvious reference I'm making here. There is a use for that, but I mean, these
Yep.
sciences need to be more hard and a lot less soft.
Well, the problem isn't. I wrote an article a while back that got published on a blog on the hardness versus the softness of science. And the fundamental problems that we're having is that people are okay with sloppy work.
Yeah.
And
And when it comes to science and math, these are precise things.
right.
And even when you're dealing with the very imprecise, quantum science and, getting into the things that are very fuzzy, but they're intentionally fuzzy and they're fuzzy in very specific ways. So even then, it's not the same, and you have to be as specific as you can even then.
Well, and yeah, and you don't get me wrong. I understand that you start talking about some of these fields, and it's very hard to do very good work, right? But the difference between the issue isn't that it's that they're sitting there and taking some shortcuts on areas where it's really hard to do really good work. It's that they're taking those areas that are taking those shortcuts and they're using it and applying it to fields that have no and social. You start talking about where we're trying to seek truth. The value of science is essentially under attack, because now we don't know what is technically true and what is not true. When we're assuming a statistical p-value, right? So for folks who don't understand, right, a p-value is the probability that you are wrong. The standard that we use in science is 5%. So 1 out of 20 studies that finds a positive result, we just assume that there is garbage. Some stuff will not replicate in science. The problem is that we're finding out that that's like anywhere between 60 and 80% of our studies within certain fields are not replicating, which means scientists are legitimately more often wrong than they are right.
And a big problem with that is too many of these people are not comfortable being wrong.
Right. Well, you
A
start
good
talking, and
scientist can take great joy in being wrong because that just gives you a new question to answer.
right. Yeah, no, and absolutely. But we're seeing in a lot of these, they're digging in and saying, well, why don't we just expand our probability value to, a p-value of 10, or 1 in 10 chance we're wrong instead of 1 in 20 chance that we're wrong, or let's drop, statistical likelihoods of being wrong anyways, or even if there's no replications that show that there was any value whatsoever to the study that was originally put out, well, doesn't it have some value anyways, because it's what we believe. My principal protest is Carol Gilligan, because that's essentially what her work was. She wrote this theory about the voice of women in schools, and it turns out that neither she nor anyone else could replicate her finding.
I can't say
Not
I'm
her,
familiar
not
with
the.
that, so if you could, I'd appreciate if you could get me a link that I can leave in here for folks to follow up on their own.
I will. I'll do my best. I can. So I actually pulled this from my textbook. I threw a damn fit in my psych class because the textbook legitimately started with one page describing her entire theory and hypothesis. I think they spent 2 or 3 pages on it, and it's like one paragraph within the textbook that says we haven't found anything that actually supports this. And Howard Gardner's in the same kind of boat. Howard Gardner wrote so Howard Gardner came about because psychologists really hate IQ tests, right? Because IQ tests consistently show group differences on socially valued traits, and it goes against the idea that everyone's a blank slate, and that if we turn around and we just train people right, then we can create the perfect society. Basically, they've deluded themselves into believing that. But Howard Gardner came up with this theory of multiple intelligences, which is IQ is just measuring this one facet of intelligence, and that there's all these other forms of intelligence that it's not measuring. So his theory of multiple intelligences he put out there, he never found any results on even his own studies, and nobody else has been able to prove his findings either. And he's the second of my people that I threw a fit about. Why am I learning this? Why is this in my textbook? If you haven't been able to validate a finding, it should not be included as part of your coursework.
So, like people
But
being pissed off at the bell curve.
yeah, well, kind of. It's a little bit more
I'm
than that, right? Like
oversimplifying here, but
yeah, his was a reaction to the bell curve, and the Minnesota Twins study and a lot of those others. But he basically made something up on the spot because he didn't like the findings that were published.
yeah, that's the very definition of bad science.
Yes, it
And I
is.
mean,
But
and that's coming
the
from
problem that we're dealing with.
and that's coming from me, which really is saying something.
Yeah, I mean it's a real problem, and it's a real problem that we're dealing with, and I think that's what we're ended up seeing cascade down is a whole bunch of people who aren't used to being wrong, don't know what it's like to be wrong, they aren't as interested in the truth as they are in being correct, and they're basically attempting to force their way to the mantle of science without actually doing any of the work.
And that's basically anathema to science. Like even the really fringe weird stuff I'm into, I'm trying to keep my basis in as hard a science as one can. I mean, when you get into theology and the occult and all that, it all gets very weird and incredibly fuzzy. But you still want to have hard measures and real lines so that at least you can compare it to something that truly is.
Well, and that's absolutely true. But I think here I'm actually going to link something about the replication crisis
Oh,
in the
okay.
chat. But one of the issues that you have is what's true, and that's what the postmodernists have really been able to dive into. is this truth from a scientific standpoint, from an epistemological standpoint, is based on a philosophy of what is technically acceptable. And that's the difficulty, is how do you, if somebody does not agree in objective naturalism or empiricism, how do you prove that what you're saying is true and what they're saying is false? Because they just reject your premise upon which you're basing your statement.
Oh yeah, I mean, it's somebody just telling you the sky is red.
Right.
It's like, but look,
Yeah.
I refuse.
Yes.
So, you've got, we're in a very troublesome time right now, and some of the wrong people have gotten into positions of power that they oughtn't. To be honest, people
Yep.
that are, to put it simply, we have people that are largely anti-science that say they love science, and really
Got a good article for that.
they're just not really helping out the discussion. They're trying to move things in directions that are, frankly, wasteful. I mean, if we are to believe that our world is in danger and we're on a limited clock, then would it not behoove us to press the gas? To get moving as fast as we fucking can? Because if we don't get things fixed quick and get new technologies rolled out, then it's the end, right? So let's, put the pedal to the metal and get to Mars, right?
Well, and I think that's kind of the thing, is that a lot of people are losing the end truth, right? The point of science and the reason that we've advanced as far as we have, human civilization, humans have been around for like 120,000 years, right? Human civilization's been around for 10, and we just got the steam engine going a couple hundred years ago, right? So we've made this tremendous progress from, essentially surviving on what we can find in the wild to having supermarkets in roughly 1/1000th of our existence.
Well, we've gone
And
from being a product of the land to controlling the land.
Right, and 1/100th of the time that we even had civilization, and we've done this with science. But what people miss is that science isn't like this is a great thing because you believe in science. And I see a lot of people saying they believe in science, and that's bullshit. If you don't believe in science, science is a question of facts and figures and proof. I don't want to see somebody come out and believe me. I want them to sit there and take a look at my work and say, well, it can't be anything else. And that's been lost.
Yeah, you need that person to say, I don't believe you, but I'm
Right.
going to verify.
Exactly.
And
that's
we don't,
exactly
we
right.
don't have, we have the person that asks the first question, but they refuse the follow-up.
Well, and that's what's kind of weird too, because if you start walking somebody through this, it's a very logical thing, and people understand it, right? You turn around and you say, okay, well, let's talk about positivism for a moment. Let's say that you decided that you were going to believe everything that everyone says. Well, this is great. Everybody's going to love you. But guess what? You're going to be just spouting nonsense because you're going to believe everything everyone tells you, and people lie, right? And so you say, okay, well, what's the opposite of that, right? The opposite of that would be cynicism, right? And cynicism is where you don't believe anything that anyone tells you, and nobody likes a cynic. So you'll do very poorly in society because nobody likes you.
And that's how you end up a flat earther.
But at the same time, you might end up as a flat earther. That's always the risk, right?
I've seen it. It's a sad tale. A sad tale.
I still, I know we've talked about it, and I know you've said that you've got this guy that believes it. I still believe it's a social club, right? I struggle to believe that that's a real thing.
It is truly the most astounding thing. It takes my breath away. I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't encountered it literally myself. It's
really
I haven't got a proper way of explaining. Like, how do you not have eyes? You've been in a plane. You've been high enough to see where the curve starts. Are your eyes that bad? Are my eyes that good that I can have seen the curve because I was high enough? I mean, I realize I have good eyes, and I can see a little faster than most people. But, that's not really all that special. You get up in a plane high enough, you can just look out and see it. It's not the most pronounced of things, but it's right there. I promised
Well,
you.
I think the crazy thing is they proved, we all sit there and taught the story of Columbus being the guy who realized the world is round.
Oh,
But
yeah.
the actual ancient civilizations with none of their Judeo-Christian values or any of the other stuff that everybody tries to apply to science, figured it out on their own with pure math. We actually it's been discovered that the Earth is round numerous times using numerous methods, and all the way into calculating the approximate. They were off. They were
Well,
off by a
and
rather large amount, but
just to put a cool bow on this thing, or cherry on top, if you like, the Antikythera mechanism works. Look it up.
the oh yeah, I'd have to. I used to know what that was. I don't
Oh,
know what
well,
that is off the top of my head.
well, I mean that's more for the listener, but to give a very brief, the Antikythera mechanism is a solar lunar calculator, basically.
Ah,
Like it'll it'll run out to like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years and give you the star positions and things like that, constellations and that sort of thing. So it was just a highly advanced little. I wouldn't. You might call it a calendar type of device. I mean, it's more complicated than that, but it is effectively a highly complicated calculating calendar.
yeah, they discovered that in like a shipwreck at the bottom of the ocean, right?
Yeah, yeah, and it. I don't know the exact dates, but it dates back to maybe pre-Christian times, probably pre-Christian times, uh,
Let me
before
see. I
Christ
got
or before Common Era. I don't care, whichever doesn't matter to me.
it. May be it's various people have dated it. It looks like it's somewhere between 87 BC and 205 BC.
And of course, the thing itself demonstrates, a greater degree of sophistication. In well, we fall back onto infrastructure. A thing like that doesn't come out of nowhere. Like one man in a place doesn't just make that. I mean, you need people that know how to make gears. You need people that know the math to do the calculations to make a thing like that work. So, it's
Well,
interesting.
you'd actually be surprised, right? So when you go back and you start talking about math, the earliest forms of math aren't really calculations. It's geometry. So it's relationships between objects, and that's most likely how it was constructed. Our actual understanding of math is relatively recent. I think our Arabic numeral system and the methods that we use today for addition, subtraction, multiplication, division are only about 140 years old-ish, somewhere in that time frame.
Now, if
You'd
I'm not
actually be surprised at
mistaken,
how new math is.
now, well, yeah, I think this might be your field. I'll run it past you. If I'm not mistaken, the concept of zero, mathematical zero, and negative numbers, that came about during the Roman era, did it not?
It that's a good question. So zero as a concept is significantly debated as to when it
Well, as a
came up.
mathematical concept.
Right. Well, there's before it was a mathematical concept, it was a functional concept, right?
Yeah, of course.
So you have I think the Rome it was basically inventory where as soon as you started talking about zero for large scale inventory. But the earliest usages was I think ancient Egyptian was who did it.
Really?
And the Greeks, I think the Greeks didn't have it. The Romans may have, but yeah, it was inventory was the thing.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, from a
So
purely logistics standpoint, like you
the
have to keep track of what is and isn't there.
yeah, Roman numerals are based off of the previous system, which would have been like notches stick or notches on or cones or something like that, and that's how they basically held it. And then Roman numerals were really great for inventory. Like fantastic for counting the numbers of crates of crap that you have coming in and out of a city.
Yeah,
Not so great for multiplication and division,
yeah, and
but very good for
basically,
counting what's coming off that ship.
yeah, the Arabic numeral system really, it's Well, that revolutionized mathematics.
Yeah, it did absolutely, and one of the reasons why you look at buildings built in the late 1800s or 1900s or even early 1900s, they're still written in Roman numerals, is that was the system up until that point. Sounds like my voice cut out, or you cut out.
Oh, I cut out. I was answering the phone, which I knew I would have to do.
Ah, got it.
Because
of course, right?
Of course, yeah, no, it's gonna happen. It's gonna happen.
Oh yeah. Well, you can't possibly.
I was here. I just
But
put you on mute so that that
well,
happened,
I hear myself coming back through your microphone, which lets me know that my voice communication is working.
Oh, okay. Well, there we go.
But yeah, no, it's. Oh, that.
And then you cut out just as you were talking.
I did. I hit the button, right? I was accidentally finger tap. But yeah, you dive into the concept of numbers, and it's relatively recent that we started using math in this current concept. Now, that's not to say that it wasn't developed prior to when we started using it, right? The Arabic, Indo-Arabic systems were used by.
Yeah, no, functionally it's going to exist.
Right, functionally it's going to exist, but prior to that, most of what we're dealing with is ratios and geometry and those kinds of concepts. Mm-hmm. And the Antikythera mechanism, bringing this back to the original point, would have been built based on those concepts rather than on strict numbers and calculations as we know it today.
Well, fair enough. But nonetheless, it nonetheless does demonstrate a fair degree of sophistication and the infrastructure necessary to produce such an item, though. Which is kind of my initial point anyway.
Yeah.
But, boy, we got off on, got a bit of a tangent on that one.
Well, math and its concept is very, very interesting. I'm trying to pull the actual date for when we started using it in European systems. Like when they actually started trying to teach the kids, because it doesn't really matter if some, university professor is using it wherever. Which, by the way, to touch on a concept, it always makes it really interesting when you start talking about the folks who are like anti-colonialist math, because technically math is like the largest diversity concept that we've pulled from the rest of the world.
Yeah, I remember for the longest time math being spoken of as the universal language. Like when we meet aliens, the way we're going to be able to speak with them is that the math is going to work and we can talk that way. It's like, then we have these people who are like, we need to decolonize math. We got to get the witch doctors in here that are going to help us teach the witch doctor math.
Right. The people who are sitting there and arguing that 2 is equal to 5 or whatever. Well, those people are absolutely fascinating because, when you're calling for the decolonization of math, what you're literally asking for is a return to systems that were entirely European, because this is something that was, Indo-Arabic systems
so what you're
that came out of the Middle East that we spread everywhere. This is diversity science.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm reading from what you're telling me is that these people are terribly Islamophobic.
That would be correct.
Now,
and
that's
they're
my
afraid
read
of the brown people of India.
Things. So I could be wrong, but that's what I'm hearing with my ears.
That would be my interpretation, is that they are Islamophobic and they are afraid of the brown people.
Well, that's reasonable. I mean, they act that way anyway, so
right.
And we've got you build a gate. You want to keep the as Joe Biden says, poor people are I won't finish. I don't want to get into the politics. I don't want to get into the politics of this. So we'll move right along.
I don't think it's generally nice to quote the mentally disabled.
True. I mean, I know that somebody tried to use the Joe Biden defense when they followed his advice in home defense, and they ended up being charged. So probably mind your
the Joe Biden defense. What is that?
Oh, well, old Joe, he said all you need is a double barrel and you shoot it off into the air when someone tries to break into your house. During some anti-gun thing. And so somebody did precisely that, and when they were arrested, they said, but Joe Biden I'm following his advice during his speech here. He said that all you need is this, and to fire your barrels up into the air. And the person was charged with, I want to say, discharge in city limits, maybe reckless endangerment. Either way, it did not work as it probably would have worked if your last name was Biden.
Got it. Got it. Well, I mean, that's how that all works out.
Yeah, it kind of does. Kind of does. It's funny how having a famous last name that
Though to be fair, right?
Opens doors, closes other ones.
I mean, people have been trying to use music, media, and politicians to justify their actions for a very.
Yeah.
What was it? There was the kid who shot up his family because he believed that they were in the Matrix, and you're like, okay, you just gotta accept it with some level of.
You know,
salt.
honestly, I would take the crazy of old over the crazy of today. At least then it was like, I'm a werewolf. I'm going to go kill people. Like, that's not cool, but, well, it's interesting for one. And, well, okay, we can see that you have mental illness, and maybe we could have actually caught someone like that. You know, we get somebody else that says redacted, and and you know they're encouraged with their mental illness.
Well, I mean, and I know that we're trying to not single out individual targets here, right? But
Right.
I think there's some perfect examples of that when you're talking, arguing that they're otherkin or other similarly weirdly enabled. Now we're sitting there and we're enabling these people
broke up
all
as
the
you
way.
were, speaking there, which is actually perfect. But no, you make an excellent point though with someone like an otherkin. I mean, there can be no legitimate argument for this
Right.
state of being. I mean,
Right.
you can make illegitimate arguments all day, but
Oh yeah,
that's all they are.
absolutely. But we have other folks who are coming forward with what are conceptually odd ideas, and we are empowering them to the point of disfigurement. You know
Absolutely.
what I mean? Like we're literally saying, okay, well, I know that what you believe, and clearly it must be true. Let's go chop off some body parts. That's really bizarre as a concept that we have decided to go that route as a society. We have decided to empower, a mental illness. That's not, it's not that I think that we should be non-compassionate. We absolutely should. Someone's suffering, and that's terrible.
Well,
But
as I said before, it's okay to be weird, and it's okay
Absolutely.
not to be normal.
Absolutely.
Just remember
Absolutely.
that you live in a society, so bear in mind that society has its own bonds and bounds. So if you're weird and different, that's okay. Just remember that you're weird and different. Be your weird, different self, and if you find others that are weird and different in that same way, relish that community. You don't have to build the world in your own image. It's not your world. Live
Well,
in
I
it.
think I think the issue that I take is actually not the folks who want to go that we're weird and different, like power to you and all that, right? If you're proud of who you are, you should be proud of who you are, right? The
Certainly.
issue I have is the doctors that are coming out and enabling this, because when somebody goes to you and says, I'm suffering, you should not be coming out and saying, let's engage your mental illness, right? I do not want to see a doctor turn around to a schizophrenic and say, yes, you really are talking to God. I certainly don't want to see a doctor go to an anorexic individual
Or shall we
and say, you are fat.
let's frame this a little bit more realistically, so that I can kind of reach as many people as possible with this message. So we'll go back to the schizophrenic. It's not so much they're saying, sure, you're talking to God. It's, okay, let's explore that. Where you should, because that's where it begins. You walk down this winding road that should be a dead end.
Right.
And
Right.
when you're
and
doing
that's,
this, these people are being harmed.
yes.
Legitimately
And
harmed.
that's my, and they're being harmed in the argument that it's a And I think that that's like, we don't have good enough data to say this actually works. There's a couple case studies, but there's also a whole bunch of folks that go through whatever process and they come out the other side and say, yeah, that didn't help me at all. I'm still just as miserable as I was before. Obviously, that wasn't the right choice. And now we've either got to do surgery to correct what we've done before, or we have to start talking about going through other forms of therapy. Whereas had we just turned around and said, well, that's not a reality.
And
Here's
this
what
comes
reality
back
is.
to,
Let's go treat this.
and a lot of this comes back to the internet is too fast.
Yes.
And the world is moving at the internet speed when the world doesn't really move at internet speed. Only the internet does. So, in all things and at all times, take a moment. That's my personal advice to everyone. Just take a moment, because you need to breathe every now and then. Even if there's COVID flakes in the air, maybe just take a second.
Well, I mean, I think we can also make the argument that if you think it sounds crazy, it probably is, right? Like, there's if somebody turns around and wants to dispute reality, we need to understand that our brain is a fantastically complex machine. And when they fail, and they do fail, they fail in spectacular ways.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can speak from experience, having spent almost a person's lifetime being a completely broken thing. The world makes sense in very different ways when you look at it from outside of the world and outside of yourself. But that's a conversation for a whole nother day. So let's actually try and see if we can't maybe reel this back in, because this has been, although a very interesting tangent, I would kind of like to draw it back into treatments, because there was one that you had brought up with me just before we got on the air, and I'd really like to explore that.
Do you want to talk about the radiation treatment, or
Absolutely.
Something that I would like to see explored?
We'll go with the radiation first, because it's radiation, and that's cool. And then we'll go with the one that you're about to tell me about. So do please expand on that.
So the one of the things that actually I'm not discovering this. A coworker showed it to me. When you work with nukes, they nuke stuff gets shared, right? That's just how it is. But essentially, if we used low energy chest X-ray, which is roughly about 10 millirem, to put this into perspective, the actual rad dose rate. So at 10 rem, which would be 1,000 millirem, at 10 rem, that's where you get that as one shot, one dose, one time. You can see a very, 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 very tiny increase in cancer risk in a population of millions. At 100 millirem, or 100 rem, which is 100,000 millirem, you get your radiation poisoning, and you have to get up to somewhere around 600 rem before you start talking about risks. So we're talking, when we say 10 millirem, it's like nothing. This is not a significant dose. So a chest X-ray, you get a hit with it once, and it does enough damage to the actual virus. So you get hit with radiation, it does damage to your cells, but it also does damage to anything else with DNA. Thing is, your cells can repair their damage. The COVID virus cannot. So you end up knocking out whatever viral load you have, which allows your body to heal just a little bit, and may actually sit there and start decreasing. You do a chest X-ray here, you do a chest X-ray there, and now instead of your lung tissue just getting bombarded by viral particles that are exploding and then creating more viral particles, you're able to sit there and actually contain the infection, because there's less infection that's being transmitted through you and external to you, with a dose of radiation that's so small you won't even notice it. It may even be in hormesis turd.
And actually, that's a really interesting segue. We'll hold off on the other one, because this kind of segues into something we were talking about before, with the way the radiation just kills the DNA. And, well, I'm generalizing. With what it does to the DNA, how I was describing that the UVC does a similar thing. There was another technology that was intent on using UV in the lungs directly. It's called Heal Light. I'll actually have a link to that. It's not been yeeted by Google. I found one. It is real. I promise you. And basically, the concept is very similar. It would be to put a UV bulb into the lungs of the individual and basically wash the whole area with that UV light. It would do significant damage to the things that are unable to repair themselves, and a fair degree of damage to the lung cells. But as with this, they would be able to repair themselves after. So
Right.
you would be left with a theoretically clean lungs for however long that lasts.
Well, I mean, and that's the thing is if you start talking about radiation treatment, whether you're doing a chest X-ray or you're doing a light,
And if we're
the
being
thing is
honest, the UV that is radiation. So it
that
is
yep.
in all technicality another radiation treatment. If you want to say it in a way that's not going to make your friends look at you like you're silly.
Well, and when you start talking about, radiation, everything that is radiation on the EM spectrum, right? Your body heat is emitted as light that's radiation. It's just so low energy that it doesn't matter, right? The visual light range is another spectrum. When you start hitting UV, the low energy UV is not so bad, but you start talking about the higher energy UV rays. And that's where you start talking about ionizing materials. X-rays is just an extension beyond that,
Absolutely.
right? So you start talking about heating up this material, and all that's doing is it just injects an electron. Now, if you're talking about something that has a dozen repair mechanisms, like a cell, and self-targeting, failure mechanisms like a body, the ionizing radiation isn't that bad because the cell gets damaged and it either repairs itself or the immune system takes care of it.
Yeah,
Right.
We're systems that are basically designed to function with things like this happening.
Well, yeah, I mean we're bathed in radiation every day. You're actually getting a significant dose almost every year. I think there was a film. It was the documentary for the nuclear industry. Not like the nuclear industry paid for it, but it was just talking about nuclear power and kind of the irrational fear of it.
The
I think it was
Atom
called
and You.
What's that?
Nothing.
No, it was like Pandora's box or something like that. In any case, they talked a little bit about it. You're bathed by it every day. You get a banana, that thing is super radioactive because it's got potassium, and potassium is radioactive. You're dealing with any one of us who is in the Northeast. We're dealing with granite. Granite has radioactive components. I deal with in terms of stuff. If you're going for gamma spectroscopy, right, which is where you're just basically analyzing gamma content, you can run around with a meter on two different types of asphalt produced in two different parts of the same state, and they're giving off different dose rates. Right, so we're bathed with radiation every day. It would be incredibly foolish to have evolved on a planet where you're bathed. Well, everything in the universe is bathed in radiation, right? It would be incredibly stupid if we didn't have a mechanism to deal with it. So we do. Yeah. The problem with radiation comes when you have so much of it at such a short period of time that you overcome the mechanisms for your repair, and that's where you start talking about cancer rates coming up because we just have too much. Your cells can't handle it. And that's just at such a high dosage, whether you're using the UV light, the heal light, or you're using just an X-ray, that those levels are so low that you are well within the tolerance level of what your body can handle. And there's some debates over hormesis, depending on which health physicist you talk to. They'll tell you it is real or it isn't real. But that's kind of the situation that you're looking at. A virus, on the other hand, is just a DNA strand. You eject an electron out of that, the whole thing just crumbles apart, and the chain's broken. The protein on the exterior won't be able to bind to your lung tissue. The actual DNA in maybe the part of the ionizing electrons or photons will hit the DNA, and the DNA is just degraded, so it won't be able to replicate. Either way, you win.
Absolutely, and any attack vector is better. All the different ways that we can deal with this thing, if we have a plethora of things that work, and they only work just a little, well, a lot of things that only work just a little can be added up into fairly effective treatment, theoretically.
I mean, it could. Usually, you're gonna only want, but I think there's a lot of stuff that we haven't even explored. So what I was talking about just before we went on the
Oh yeah,
was
absolutely, definitely get into this.
one of this is all completely like Steve's theory of how things should be done. One of the things that we haven't really investigated thoroughly is a series of compounds called perfluorocarbons. And perfluorocarbons are actually liquids that we can breathe. So I think there was a movie, I think it was called The Abyss, what I think it was.
Oh
And
man,
they
I was just about to talk about that. Yeah, liquid oxygen.
yep, that's an actual thing. It's called perfluorocarbons, and we can
Huh.
suspend people in perfluorocarbons, and they can theoretically breathe from it. Um,
I
impurities
have
are a
seen
problem.
some. I've seen some videos back in the day of some of this stuff. As a matter of fact.
Yep. I mean, I think that if we're going to talk about like long space travel and high G-force stuff, that may be what we end up having to convert.
Oh yeah, the cavities in your body are dangerous at speed.
Yes, that it generally air does not hold up so well under multiple or fluids. But if you're submerged in a fluid sac, then you actually don't have to worry about it because the pressure is uniform around you. But yeah, perfluorocarbons are one of the downsides to air, right? When we're trying to deliver drugs, if you start talking about something like an inhaler, right? Something like 60-70% of the med doesn't even make it to your lungs. So if you go get an inhaler nowadays, spacer, which is just basically a long tube to try to allow more of the medication to aerosolize. Well, if we were able to sit there and start pumping your lungs, and instead of putting you on an air respirator, which has to force itself through cavities and it's a compressible gas and all of these other problems, if we were to use something like perfluorocarbons, which you could breathe off of, we could completely saturate your lungs with a fluid that has treatments or drugs suspended within it, and you would be able to basically knock off most of the mechanisms of transport of the virus around the lungs. I'm always surprised that
Hmm.
nobody really starts thinking about how we can start using these compounds
That
to
is a
treat
really
people.
interesting thought.
And again, it's all completely like, this is my idea of where I want to see as kind of a futurist. I want to see these compounds explored. I want to see the idea where we can suspend people in liquids so that we can
Well, I
start
mean, that's
putting the
actually
human
kind of a
body through more
classic
stuff.
sci-fi trope. You know, the back to tank or the rejuve tank or whatever.
Or the Eve pods.
I avoided going there. I. It immediately came to mind. I thought about it.
I just started getting back into Eve, and so I've seen my goo more than a few times. But yeah, I've always been surprised that we haven't started looking into really like hardcore alternatives such as that, where we can use oxygen rich stuff to treat people who are not breathing that well. Or even separately start using machines that allow us to kind of take the lungs offline, so we can specifically treat that tissue with something that might damage the entire rest of the body, and
Well,
just keep the rest of the body going with
well,
perfusion machines.
well, being completely honest, if all you need to do is keep someone medicated and isolated, which is exactly what we need to do right now, you
Yep.
couldn't really ask for better than a like a 4 foot by 4 foot by 10 foot tube. That's
Yep.
pretty damn space efficient,
Yep.
and a
And
lot more efficient than a whole room full of a bed and whatever other things, because you can just everything can be done. I mean, an IV could be run. There's a compelling argument for that. Now, my heart goes out to the person that is kind of not cool with enclosed spaces. My heart breaks for you, but
yeah,
we are
we
going
had
to
meant
fix
for
you.
that though. Right. They can put a little bit of ketamine in your system, and you're right.
Yeah, maybe we'll we'll try and avoid giving you the Jordan Peterson treatment, because that one seemed to maybe not go so super well. But we'll do something. We'll figure
Right.
it out. We'll make it work for you. Tell you what.
Right. Yeah, and that's kind of the thing is you start talking about these things. The COVID presents an opportunity for us to radically change how we treat people. And realistically, we've just been doing the same thing for years and years, and it's worked pretty well. But if we did have, like what you said, you had an isolated tube, well, all you need to do is toss a filtration system on that, and there you go.
Yeah,
You've
you
got a
have.
quarantine room. You can put the patient in a biomedical containment facility. You got a filtration thing. You don't have to worry about reinfection or
Yeah,
anything like that. You
there's
can
no
zap the
positive
liquid that
pressure
comes out.
issues.
Nope.
I mean, you have a literal fluid that you would have to deal with.
Yep. And then you hook them up to whatever you need to, like an IV line, that, and you could maintain that at appropriate temperature and appropriate pressure, and you could it's a lot easier to force a fluid into somebody's lungs than it is to force air, right? And it would be easier for them to breathe a fluid like that than it would be for them to breathe air.
Having nearly drowned, I can say that that is true.
Yep. Well, that's not a fun way to go.
No, no, no. It's kind of fine at first, but then it starts burning, and that's not good. When it stops burning, that's when it gets scary. But anyway, that's also another story for another time.
Yeah.
So I had no idea you'd be going there with that. That's actually really cool. I'm only just a little familiar with the concept of that.
Well, so here I'll actually link the Wikipedia page. Something I with space stuff, all that's kind of where I think we got to end up going.
Yeah, no, I mean that is reasonable, and it's potentially a viable, excuse me, potentially a viable, avenue of medicine, like something that is worth pursuit in and of itself.
Well, I mean, even everybody kind of knows it, but nobody actually does anything with it. So, it's kind of a shame, right? Because we could be developing the technology that gets us, to Mars in a sedated state, and be developing the technology that fixes COVID. Win-win.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, dual-use technologies are what have brought us so far,
Yep.
largely. I mean, a lot of our modern, really cool high-tech stuff is dual-use technologies. Case in point, great case in point. Particle accelerator is a particle beam cannon.
Yes, it is.
Period. It's two particle beam cannons shooting at each other. And I don't know if you're aware, a particle beam cannon is a horrifyingly dangerous weapon. It will, to say it simply, melt through anything.
Oh yeah.
Anything. It doesn't matter what. It's there are not armors that are adequate. You would require another particle beam or force shields, which we don't really have anything that's even remotely adequate to deal with the kind of power of beam that we could actually put out.
Well, it all depends, right? So if you're dealing with yeah, it would be really tough if you decided to use a proton beam.
Yeah, I
But
mean
that would be
they're
that would be really
horrifying
tough.
weapons. Horrifying. And it's even said that Tesla's death ray was the this modern particle beam weapon. And that's something I would be absolutely fascinated to find some more work on, but it is an interesting proposition and would make sense considering his areas of research.
Yeah, that would be an The only problem that you have, right, with particle beams is the energy requirements,
Oh,
right?
astronomical.
Like you're not talking about um you're not talking about something that's a cheap and easy thing to build or put. You'd basically be talking about, so first off, you start talking about something like a Navy ship, right?
Yeah,
So we got
that
nuclear
is as
reactors
man
on.
portable as you're going to get with a particle beam
Pretty
weapon.
much. Pretty much. And then what's the point, right? Because your particle beam weapon is only going to shoot in one direction, right? And we have weapons that go around the curve of the Earth, and it's not particularly effective to fire a particle beam cannon at a target without having the ability to curve it around the planet. So you need to basically have something in space that you can fire it at, and then it redirects it to your target. But at that point, why would you're going to basically do almost as much damage to the target in space as you are to the target it's aiming at.
Not to say that wouldn't be a fascinating avenue of technology to pursue, with innumerable knock-on technologies to be found from it, but it does seem kind of wasteful and silly at this point.
It is. It is just a little bit. Well, I think that's kind of the problem that you have. Start talking about what are we researching and why, and getting this, that, or the next, technology. Why is it that we aren't seeing, when we hit 2015, why is it that we aren't seeing flying cars and all the other stuff? The answer is because there's no real value, right? The
Well,
difficulty in
there is a
attaining.
value. It's that cost value exchange.
Yes.
They're too expensive. Even the will is there. The will is absolutely there, but the price isn't, and even there isn't a way to bring it into a kind of economy of scale, because to do that would
Right.
require a whole nother infrastructure, which now we kind of have. There is a whole drone infrastructure. Like, drones are a big thing and a big business. So to
Yep.
ramp that up, make it a little bit bigger, isn't such a big deal now. 10 years ago, a whole other matter entirely. So now you're seeing, just the other day, the flying car out of Tokyo that had an actual rider. The flying taxis out of Dubai that they're going to be premiering, I think, next year. It's if if you don't have the tools, you can't do the work.
Well, I think one of the things that's always going to be difficult, um, with getting something like that going, is going to be your power source, right?
And that's where,
It-
well, that's where a lot of our things fall apart, because
right.
everything takes power.
Yep. Well, I think that's one of the big my if you want to talk about where, so why am I in the camp of being super skeptical about things like global warming? A lot of it comes into the energy technology and the proposals that you see right now. We're chasing what looks like a dead end to me of, solar, wind, and batteries, which are like the trifecta of terrible technologies, just because you're trying to store electrons on other electrons in space. You're never going to get That's never going to be light, right? That it's just going to be a mass question, like how much sheer mass can you put into something? And then you're always going to have those the charging issues, and the dielectric breakdown of the material that's differentiating them. That's, I think, always going to be our problem. And as we start talking about, looking into the future, uh, concepts like Back to the Future, they dealt with that by putting a fusion reactor on the vehicle. Right? We don't have a fusion reactor that works yet, and they had one that was vehicle size. You start talking about things like Star Trek, right, where we start dealing with technologies that eliminate the scarcity problem. That's based off of antimatter reactors, which again we don't have, which have energy matter conversion technologies. And so we keep on saying, hey, yeah, we're going to achieve all of these great things, but all of it requires high density energy sources, and we're choosing to pursue low density energy technology.
Well, that's kind
So
of
for
an.
me,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
just for me, that seems to be the inherent problem that we have when we start talking about, why is it that we haven't achieved our great future?
Well, just to kind of dive down this tangent just a little bit, people don't really realize what we're capable of today. There are some things that would take your breath away if you saw what the very bleeding edge of material science can do.
Oh
But
yeah.
it's money and power, and not power over people, electrical power.
Yep.
To produce the amount of power to do some of the things that we can do today is just not feasible. Like, we could build a flying car that levitates, like in the Matrix today. We could do it. It's going to cost you a nation.
Well, what was it? The during Obama's tenure there, someone somewhere actually figured out how to build a Death Star, like a Death Star, a real Death Star that we could build, and it was like all of the money that had ever been made ever.
Yeah, yeah. It's like, and the thing is, we are at a very interesting place technologically. We just don't have, again, the infrastructure for these things. We don't have the economy of scale for some of these things, because things kind of move slowly. They don't move at the speed of the internet, which is an interesting way to draw that back in. And drawing it back in, let's go to this one that I found recently, actually just a few days ago, about the feline antiviral. There's not a lot here, but I did link it in the chat, and I'll have it for
Yep.
everybody as well. That we were talking about this, and it doesn't really, go into too many specifics, other than that it is a protease inhibitor, which, interestingly enough, works in a vaguely similar vector to the other methods we've been just recently discussing. It interferes with the ability of the virus to actually replicate, so it defangs it, if you will. But this has apparently been around for some time, a relatively new drug, but it's been used to treat coronavirus in cats and is completely efficacious, has no real harm. So with this being not merely a drug that's going through trials, it is a current drug, kind of like hydroxychloroquine was. Now, this one has no human models and no human trials, but it has a completely well-established, long-standing, or, well, not necessarily long-standing, but a well-established animal model. So we could theoretically move this thing directly into human testing. Thoughts?
Well, my only issue with this is felines.
Yeah, felines and humans are certainly not analogous. We're not looking at like a mouse or a monkey.
Right. Oddly enough, of all of the critters on the planet, we tend to like cats are the not very close to humans, and that would be my largest concern. They have specific things that are extremely toxic to them that do nothing to us, and vice versa.
Yeah.
Right. That's people think of dogs and chocolate. You can think of the best insect controls for like fleas or ticks or something like that. It will kill a cat. Right. You could bathe in it. It's not going to be pleasant, but it won't kill you. Right. Your dog may get a little bit irritated by it, but it'll straight up kill the cat. So they're very different than us. That being said, it's very interesting that they kind of have this off-the-shelf thing that may work well, but it looks like it's the same thing as like HCQ there for hydroxychloroquine. I'm just going to use the initials, very very long, but but it looks like it's the same kind of similar mechanism of action. It looks like it's a similar type of drug. HCQ is also an antiparasitic. It'd be great if it works, but
Yeah.
I am skeptical of the transition from a cat to a human.
Yeah, absolutely. But nonetheless, I mean, if it works, well, we have one functional model, so at least it gives us a basis. So it's
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'm just not going to volunteer for that trial.
Same. But also a good segue there is, these are kind of antiparasitics. So let's kind of drop into the recent research out of Ireland about ivermectin.
Yep.
Which is, again, an antiparasitic. Why in the hell are all of these very odd substances, like yet another antiparasitic drug? And, well, the reporting on this, I'll just read it to you directly from the article. I'll have linked for you. It's been reported the antiparasitic drug ivermectin kills COVID-19 virus SARS-CoV-2, and have been asked repeatedly for my reaction to the report. This is coming out of William C. Campbell from the MIRA, it's Royal Irish Academy. And in brief, the evidence of the lethal effect of ivermectin on SARS-CoV-2 has been called to public attention. Study is the in vitro test, for not done by simply exposing virus to drug and glass, but rather exposing it in living mammalian cells. So, I mean, these are good models. But the other thing is here, it looks like this one is also an early stage kind of thing. So whatever this is, and whatever vectors it uses, it is just one of the most peculiar fucking things I've ever seen in all my life.
Well, to be fair though, right, if you read through, it does say that the drug concentration of ivermectin required is so sufficiently, the probability of being able to use it for humans is low. So there's there's a thing to note there, but it is kind of weird that it's the antiparasitics that work on this thing.
It really is.
But
now that said, with some of the new nanodosing technologies, that might be a thing. That could be a way of delivering this, like what they've developed for the newer chemotherapies, where it does the microdosing, but in the right areas, as opposed to just kind of hitting your whole body.
Oh yeah. Some of the drug delivery systems they're talking about are absolutely amazing.
Oh yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
if they could do that, like again, one of the problems that you have when you're trying to treat someone with our medical technology is what we need to have an effect on a specific tissue will kill another specific tissue. So if you are able to get to the point where you're able to, do microdosing, where you're able to deliver the drug directly to where you need it, and it's not going to be, interacting with the liver or the kidneys or something else that you need to survive, you may actually have a really good solid case for, using that.
Yeah, then you can use some of the most vile and toxic things you can imagine.
Oh yeah. Yeah, absolutely. If you don't have to worry about the liver shutting down or the kidneys shutting down, that'd be great. What I don't understand is why we haven't come up with like semi-life support, right? Where you can remove an organ temporarily, reattach it at a later point, and you take the organ out and you treat it and you repair it and then you put it back in the human.
Well, that would be a really great thing with the liver, sometimes with the lung and the heart, but you don't really see it for anything else. But I mean, why not? You raise a very valid point. That's another area of medicine that's kind of completely unexplored. People just not really bothering to think outside the box. When maybe this box is not big enough to hold us anymore.
Yeah, well, I think I don't know if it's not big enough to hold us. I mean, you look at it, right?
I mean, we can keep living on with modern medicine.
Right.
Modern medicine is good, but it does need to get better.
Yeah, well, I mean, imagine if with some sort of treatment where it doesn't cost as much because you've taken out, or you can take more riskier approaches because you've eliminated the risk by removing the affected portions, and you reinstall them later. Look at it, look at human beings as a part shop. We just go down to
we're not
the old
far away, actually.
Human for Napa for humans.
I mean, we're really close. It's been over a decade since I believe it was a heart was 3D print. Well, this was done before 3D printers were kind of a thing. I mean, they were a thing, but it wasn't.
Yep.
It was done differently. So what? There's this medical team out of Brazil that used a modified laser printer to print out stem cell layers of a heart, or I don't know if it was stem cells. It was some kind of lattice. I think it was a stem cell lattice.
I think it was a stem cell lattice too.
And they printed it out in layers, reassembled it, and then basically just gave it the nutrients it needed, and it grew the heart that they were expecting. It didn't grow the heart they were expecting because they had built the heart, basically. It filled in the blanks of the heart they were expecting.
Oh, I didn't realize they were actually that successful.
Yeah. I mean, this is a couple of years back too. I mean, we're basically at the printing organs thing, and with pluripotent stem cells as they are, and with cloning technology where it is now, I mean, it wouldn't be all that hard to put your DNA into a pluripotent stem cell and just put it into that framework and have it finish the job.
Could you imagine? Could you imagine getting to the point where you're like, okay, it's time to.
Shit, I've been smoking too long, guys.
Out the parts.
I've been smoking too long. I'm not quitting, so I'm getting some new ones.
Yeah,
that's just it. I'm getting some new lungs.
I mean,
I'll get the new heart later, but the lungs, they're shot, man. I got to get some new ones. But I mean, today you could do it if you want to spend the money. That one is not going to cost a nation. That one's going to cost about a state. So, within reason. Or if you're in China, you can just pick one up from the local organery.
Yeah. Well, they don't need
they have them
anymore,
fresher
right?
there. But
they are.
They don't quite have your genetic profile. So maybe worth your money to spend it. If you're an oligarch out there looking for a new set of lungs.
Well, I think that we're going to be seeing in the next 10 to 20 years some really impressive biomedical,
Oh,
like
we
really impressive, the stuff of fantasy. So we have, recently we're starting to talk about the ability to start doing neural interfacing. I know Musk is working on that, which isn't really a surprise. Turns out all of these like tech gurus got to a point where they realized they were about to die, and then they started getting really innovative, right? And so I think we're going to be seeing like neural interfacing will be good, but there's also some developments on uh, immortality vaccines,
Oh, this is a topic about
anti-aging
which I
vaccines.
know quite a bit. I stay
Ah,
very on top of this. Well, we
my
should
wife
save
is in the
this one
same
for
boat.
its own show because it is its own show. Because
That
there
would
is
be that
so
would be
much there.
fantastic.
Yeah.
There really is. It's absolutely fascinating how far that technology series has come along.
Oh, people don't realize how very close we are to defeating our oldest foe. Like
Yes.
we are within a hair's breadth of defeating age.
Yep. We
And
we really are. In 10 to 20 years, you may be at the point where you don't have to worry about dying.
and that
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 is going to be
sounds
amazing.
wild and it's weird to wrap your head around it, but do we deserve that? You need to divorce yourself of these old notions because they're tied to a machine that will eventually wind down. When you're not held in that box anymore, you can do things in ways that are more grand and more important. Imagine, if you will, that every greedy, old, shitty fuck with lots of money thought, well, I'm going to die eventually, so what the fuck do I care? I'm going to do what I want. Now, that person, you take that limit off. It's like, well, okay, yeah, I can do what I want, but shit, I'm going to have to deal with this in 100 years.
Yep. Well, I
And
think
it it builds in the possibility for a requirement of a more mature humanity.
and I think you start talking about you go through like the fantasy genre, and that's kind of the premise of your elven races are the ageless, multi-century long people, and they don't even consider you to be mature until well past what we would consider to be an adult human being. And you deal with like younger younger groups there, and they're 50, 60 years old, and they're considered like teenagers, and they're respected accordingly, right? I think that we'd be dealing with. So first off, there's two things that you start seeing is people go, "Oh my God, we're going to deal with overpopulation." I don't think that's true at all. I think
We're
that the
going to
more
space,
people we
people.
have,
Shut up about that nonsense. We're going to
well,
space, and so we're going to need people to stay here that remember all the shit so that we don't fuck it up again. Because we're fucking
well,
it up right now. So we need to keep these people around so that they remember and don't let all of this happen again.
I think that what we miss is that every human being, every advancement that we have is caused by an individual. Every single one. So the more individuals we have to the problem, the faster that we can solve it. And the more people that we get to that have the knowledge and the specialization, like I think the biggest regret that I have right now in my current life is that my lifespan is limited, so I can only learn so much about so many things. You take somebody who's able to start, we start talking about extending our lifespans indefinitely or giving ourselves immortality, and all of a sudden, not only can you be a specialist in a field like say nuclear stuff, you can go be a specialist in chemistry, you can be a specialist in biology, and you can start talking about how we can start merging these technologies and get synergies that we just can't do right.
You can
And
have
that is going
people
to be
that have
amazing.
you can have people that have amounts of knowledge in the area of a computer, and the way that a person works with this knowledge
Right.
is just different than a computer. Not to say that we won't get there. I've no doubt of that. Tay would have protected us. But but that's
Oh, poor
yet
Tay.
another topic for another day. Bless her electronic soul.
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, that was a fun one. But I think at the end of the day, what you're looking at is that's the downside. Is right now the limitations that we have prevent people from gathering multiple specialties, right? And we
Absolutely.
start talking
It
about
takes a
going
truly
forward.
exceptional individual to be able to pull all these disparate knowledges together.
Right.
And if you could make that more accessible, just
Right.
like we have with math being in the hands of more people and literacy being in the hands of more people, we're about to go to the stars.
Yep.
We're in the scheme of humanity, we are the blink of an eye from having cities on Mars.
Yep.
In the scheme of well accepted humanity, I should even say, of younger humanity. In the scheme of the oldest humanity that is in the oldest books of the mystery colleges. It's still just the blink of an eye. The
Yep.
oldest humanity spoken of in the most mysterious of mystery colleges are no more than 3 million years.
Well, and I think that you start talking about what we're dealing with is a huge potential for our growth and our advancement. And I see people that are afraid of that, but I think it's very exciting times.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We'll absolutely have to get back together and do a whole show on this because it is. I could talk on the topic for ages because the implications are just enormous. I mean, it changes everything. When people don't have a clock, you can do things that just can't be done when you're on a timer. When you know the clock's going to run out, there's certain things you just can't do. You don't have the time to do it.
Well, I mean, imagine going to like 60, 65 years old where we're not retiring, right? You work your first job, you specialize in that, you get your retirement pension from that, and then you use that money to go pursue your career number two.
Yeah,
We'd be dealing with the richest civilization in history getting ever more richer because it is the richest civilization in history. We're
yes.
talking about building just
imagine
great
a
technology.
machinist that works in a machine shop and makes parts all day.
Yep.
The guy, or girl, whatever, they've done this for 30 years. They know their way inside and out of a CNC machine because, we're being honest, it's today. They know exactly how to deal with this sort of thing. They're experts at it. And, they get to the end of their career, their body's a little bit broken, but they have got a wealth of knowledge, engineering knowledge, that an engineer just doesn't have. Now, say that
Yes.
person, they can now take that hard-won material understanding, and they could go in and actually pursue a material science PhD.
Or, I mean, even imagine them going right? Like, could you imagine a machinist who knows how to work every part everywhere being an orthopedic surgeon? He'd probably be the best orthopedic surgeon on the planet.
Or going into sports medicine or something like that, for that matter.
Right.
I mean, because how many people get injuries in factories that somebody that worked there 40 years understands intrinsically? There's it changes everything, to put it simply.
It does. It does. And I think, there's always going to be the people who are going to be the naysayers, but I think it would change everything better. I really do.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as with any sea change in the nature of society, there is a time that, things are difficult. But, once we cross that threshold, we're on the other side of it.
No, we just got to get through this rough patch, right?
Indeed we do. Indeed we do. So I had a couple other things here that I'd kind of like to go over. And
Sure.
What was the one that you had for me here? Oh, yeah, we kind of went over bacteriophages, so we don't really need to touch on that one. We went over the feline one. I've got something else here. Did we go over the... Did we actually get a chance to go over the coronavirus testing with the new testing, how it's going into greater specificity and kind of riding up the numbers?
Oh, we did not talk about that.
Yeah, because I was wanting to get into that, because that one actually just came out yesterday out of the New York Times, the Approva Mandavali. Or Mandavili, excuse me. But where they were, the coronavirus testing is positive, maybe it shouldn't be. What they're doing with that, let me get up the article here so we scroll down a little bit in the article before it tells me that I need to log in. Too late. All right. Well, what this is doing, like I was saying earlier, it's going to a much further and deeper iteration of the test. So you're getting a lot. Oh man, need to back up on that. So the test that they're using is very common, and it basically takes a sample and they recreate that sample and concentrate it over iterations.
Yep.
And
PCRs.
yes, yeah, PCR. Thank you. And what's happening with this is they get to where you normally would be, like the concentration that you would find normally in the world is something like 10 to 20 iterations into this PCR test. And they're going as far as 30 to 50 in these. And, well, obviously, as you can tell, you're going to get a lot more positives when you're getting in there. And a lot of this is coming from maybe you got such an exposure that it didn't even really get into your system. It was, you got one coronavirus, what would you call it, a molecule, a thing, whatever the hell you call an individual virus. You got that into your system and it was easily defeated as it was literally one molecule.
Yep.
So, we might be getting to these levels of specificity to where, I mean, even a person that's in danger would be able to beat it if it was just literally the one. I mean, perhaps I'm being a little glib here, but you get what I'm saying.
Right. I mean, and that's whether it's one, whatever it is. At the end of the day, there's a certain dosing that is required. And that's true for almost everything, including self-replicating viruses. Right. If you get a handful or a million or something like that, well, you got a few billion cells that they've got to go through, right? You can't inoculate and culture, biological organisms. So I'm sure if Craig was here, he'd probably start hemming and hawing because from chemies, right, what we know is that if you want to scale up a process, right, you need to go in multiple stages. So if I want to brew a vat of 100 million gallons of goo, right, I've got to make a pitcher of 1 gallon of goo, and that'll get put into a pitcher of 10 gallons of goo, and then that 10 gallons will be 100, and you get like a factor scale up of roughly 10. And the same thing's true with almost any system because you just don't have the number of interactions that you need in that rapid engagement. You start talking about something like the human immune system. It's not, we think of the immune system as like killer T cells in our macrophages and all the other stuff, right? No, it's 90% of your immune system is your skin, right?
Oh yeah,
10% of it
that it not even get in the first place.
Right. 90% of it is your skin. 10% of it is your snot, right? There's like this fractional percentage that is what you actually have to deal with once all of the rest of the world has infiltrated. So, we're pretty well developed after, a few million years of evolution here. And hundreds of millions, billions of years of evolution, whatever you want to have it, to have all of these different kind of defense and depth layers. And we're finally getting the point from a science perspective where we can develop tests to find these micro traces of something that doesn't matter.
Yeah,
and we're not aware of
in this case.
Right. It goes down to the same kind of thing we were talking about earlier where there's two aspects to science. One is your does it matter question, and just first is can you detect it, and the second question is does it matter, right? If I get a really precise instrument and I turned around and I could detect a difference between the width of your stove and the width of my stove, even they're supposed to be roughly the same width, and it's a thousandth of a micron, what the frick does it matter, right? And we need to ask that question a little bit more often, and I think that than what we are.
Oh yeah, certainly. I mean, it's what's perspective is what's being missed in this.
We are not putting things in contrast to the background.
Yeah, and I'll link Pruva's thread here so that you can go over it. It gives a really nice kind of brief on the article she wrote. I'll have that for anybody that's listening. So I think we've kind of covered all the really interesting stuff, like the out there kind of things anyway, as far as COVID goes. Now let me just see, because there was a Well, there's all sorts of others as well. Like I remember early on when the hydroxychloroquine stuff was coming out, people were really interested, and then, well, the wrong people talked about it. So of course we can't be interested anymore. Now, curiously enough, to that note, we haven't seen that same response to the convalescent plasma. Are you familiar with this or how it works?
I read something about it a little while ago. Isn't that where
I can actually break it
they?
down a little bit.
Yeah,
I'm
go
kind
ahead.
of familiar. So the convalescent plasma is literally as it sounds. You take the plasma from a convalescent person, put it into, an ailing person. The long and short of it is, you do that, you can get this into people that are in late stage, and it works. It basically puts the antibodies that their body needs to fight in place to start fighting. And it works very well late stage. It's pretty much it. It hasn't been through those proper testing. It hasn't been verified completely, but it's in all anecdotal tests. And anecdotally it's working. In all tests it works. There's been no negative responses. Basically, it seems like we've got another one that just works. Sure, should go through full vetting, but if it works and we know it works, why not?
Plasma is always interesting. You can spin out I mean, the stuff that you have a rejection to is your blood cells, right? That's what
Oh
the
yeah, I
proteins
didn't.
are.
Yeah, I did just kind of really, really 1,000 foot that one, didn't I? Let me go in a little bit
Yeah,
more
yeah,
detail.
it was a little bit high, so I'm gonna try
Okay,
to
okay. So
explain how it worked.
let me get into a little bit more of the minutia on that. So they separate out the plasma from your blood, get the blood back into you, and that plasma is then cleaned and treated so that any active viri that remain are gone, so that all you're left with is just your T cells and other antiviral active stuff that's going to be in the plasma. That is then transfused into the host, or, well, would it be the host? Well, into the person suffering, and
Right.
from that point, they generally have a fairly quick response. Like their body starts to fight it off as it ought to, as opposed to starting to kind of kill itself.
Yep. Well, I think if I remember correctly, the largest danger for this disease is not the disease itself, but the body's overreaction to it.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
that's
with
where
the
the lung
cytokine
problems
storm.
come from. Yeah,
Yeah.
your lungs just start eating themselves up, and
Yep.
the fluid in there is basically just lung.
Yep. And
And
that's what I think. I mean, part of that is I think is that we have as a society gotten to this point where we're obsessed with germ free, kind of along with the protect the kids forever kind of thing. But the we are our immune systems are not being exposed to things that they should be, and that I think is causing some of those problems. But
you hear that, kids?
yeah,
Go play outside.
eat the dirt. The dirt is good for you.
Not a lot, but at least make sure there's a little in there.
Just as long as you're pooing brown and no other colors, you're good.
Right? And maybe smell a peanut every now and then.
Yes.
Maybe just a sniff,
Smell all the peanuts.
just a whiff. But there was something else I was actually thinking about bringing up with you that it seems kind of anecdotal to me, but I'd love to have your thoughts on it. So it seems like viral load is more tied to this than it has to others. Because what I'm seeing is the people that are able to get this actually get it. Not the asymptomatic cases, but the people that actually get it actually get sick, even just to the minor degree of like they get a sniffle or they get a cough for a day. But the people
Yep.
who get an actual physical reaction, they seem to have the best recoveries, the fastest recoveries, and the most trouble-free recoveries. Whereas the longer this takes, the longer it takes, and these people too also, from, again, just anecdotally, seem to crop up faster than that 14-day line that some of the worst cases do. Like it seems like the longer this takes to crop up in you, the more deeply it's got its talons in you, and the more
I've,
damage it can do. Now, I am the farthest thing from an epidemiologist or a doctor, but I'd love to have your thoughts on kind of my thinking on that. I think to sum it up is the more load this virus can get into you, the worse it's going to act. Like that there isn't a hard line after which you're just sick. Like there's a line and then it would build like mercury, if you understand what I'm saying by that.
So I want to. I'm not an epidemiologist, so I have not confirmed or seen these things. I'd have to dig into the research a little bit more to be like really high end. But I'm seeing you tossed out two different sides of the spectrum. One, you said that if you get a lower load and it takes longer to build up, that you do worse. And then the last statement, your closing statement there was that if you get a whole bunch of it all at once, it seems to really screw you. So which of those is
Oh, sorry, no,
and
that
what am I
no,
misinterpreting?
I was thinking that no, just length of time incubation as opposed to viral load in the first case. Sorry.
Okay. Well, I mean, that's not a surprise, right? Like your immune system, it's just like any other reaction. The more exposure you have, the longer your exposure lasts, the worse you get. When you start talking about um, whether it's poison ivy or bee stings or things like that, there is as much as we want you to be exposed to allergens early and often. If your body is properly reacting to something like trying to contain a virus, the longer that it is exposed to that, the more aggressive the response becomes. And that may be what you end up seeing, is that this prolonged low load case, you've got an infection, but it's not really that big of a deal. It ends up worse because your immune system is like gearing up for this thing that's not there. So it just starts attacking you.
Hmm. Okay, well, that's an interesting thought.
But like I said, I need to dig into that a little bit more. I hadn't seen any.
Well, like I say, this is entirely anecdotal from my end. I mean, this is just from just being a news hound and going over it. It's there could be absolutely nothing to it. It's just something that kind of struck me. I am a pattern recognizing machine, and I am seeing some kind of pattern. There might be nothing to it. It might just be that all the checkerboards just happen to be black and white. It has nothing to do with anything. But there might be something there, and that would be a fascinating thing to reveal as well. If the actual viral load has some very specific result. Like if you get more of the virus in you, there's a line at which it's going to start doing new and different things, which might explain some of these new and different things that you get out of the asymptomatic cases or out of the cases that have to go into the hospital, like where you've got the long-lasting heart and lung damage. It'd be interesting. Well, we're going to be looking this over for years and years, tearing this apart.
Oh yeah. Oh, absolutely. And we're going to dig into our response and whether it was appropriate. I got something here from the Lancet that indicates higher levels of viral load predict mortality. So
Well,
that would indicate that
interesting. So there is something to that.
That does seem to be the case. So but I mean, reading through it on a high level, it looks like it just says that if you have a higher level of infection, you have a higher level of death.
Symptomatic hospitalized patients, it looks like too, but still, nonetheless, I mean,
yeah,
really, really good information to have. Oh, that's from this month too. Wow.
Yep. So we have it looks like 10 to the 5.2 versus 10 to the 6.4. 10 to the 6.4 is death, and 10 to the 5.2 is non-death. But it does appear that is what higher viral. But that just means that you have a worse infection, right?
That would also lend itself well to something like the heal light or the radiation treatment. I mean, because if you can
knock down the load,
cut that viral load.
Yeah.
I would wager that with one of these treatments applied with the convalescent plasma, that would probably be a real 1-2 knockout punch.
It could be.
I would love to see that trialed.
I mean, I think so. If maybe it's me being a rad guy, right? Like, I think my preferred treatment would be the X-ray. Like, if I could turn around and if the doctor turned around and said, "Okay, here's your treatment option. Once every other day, we're gonna
I lost you. Once every other day.
If once every other day the doctor said, "Hey, we got to throw you in under the X-ray machine. You got to take a chest X-ray. 5 minutes and you're done. No surgery, no medical treatment. It's, $15 ish. I think is roughly what the cost comes out to be. Well,
Fair.
probably a lot more. God knows,
Mm.
right? That would be cheap, easy, highly scalable. Every hospital would have the ability to treat all their patients. I would really like to see that done kind of in isolation on its own. And then if the convalescent plasma works, absolutely toss that in. But I mean, all of these things are like, that's one of the things that I'm seeing is I'm seeing that more often than not, I'm not leaning towards your full scale biopharma response because it looks like these cheaper drugs have an effect. It looks like these cheaper treatment methods have an effect. It looks like literally the stuff that doesn't make anybody any money is what's effective.
Funny enough, yes. Like it looks like we've got real efficacious things out there that are out there today. Maybe not the cure, but real treatments that could make a
Yep.
huge difference, like night and day.
And I mean that's all we really need to do, right? Like it's not
Yeah,
it,
if we
our
can take
our
that R
initial.
value from around 1 and put it around zero point 0.1, everything completely changes. We can go back to living our lives.
Well, I mean, and that's kind of the thing, we started with all these crazy numbers and downs as bad as we originally projected back in like, January or February. And we need to be started to focus on how do we get back to normal. Like, I don't want to be dealing with all this shit for the next 2 or 3 years. That's no fun,
Yeah, I mean,
right? People are burned out.
there are businesses still in my town that haven't opened back up, and I'm in
Wait,
a very safe place. But
me too.
and
But although all of our businesses basically remain outside of whatever Cuomo did, right? They did. We're the land of Cuomo chips.
uh,
So you want a
condolences.
beer, you got to order your Cuomo chips.
Gotcha. Yeah, you have my very sincerest condolences.
I feel the same.
I can imagine. I hope only ever to have to imagine and never to have to experience it personally.
It's a beautiful state. There's a lot of wonderful things. The politics is not one of them,
Well,
and the
hopefully,
taxes.
hopefully people will have taken the recent time as a learning experience and will have grown and learned important lessons that they will apply in the coming election, shall we say, without without calling any names or being impolite. Just people will take the lessons of the politics of the day and apply them going forward.
Well,
I would hope.
it all depends, right? So I used to live in New Hampshire, and New Hampshire was interesting because Massachusetts is almost as nutty as actually I suspect honestly from where I live, right? I live in a red portion of New York, a
Hmm.
very red portion of New York. Pretty much everything outside of the city of New York is red, so it's a lot more reasonable. Massachusetts, on the other hand, is I think competing directly with California to out California, and
As
that's a
long as
very
they're not,
hard challenge.
that is a tall call, but I mean, as long as they're not trying to out Portland anyone, then
Yeah, I think as
we're still
long
fairly
as
safe. As long as nobody's
yes,
trying to
yeah,
out Portland, there's still hope.
there is. But yeah, the downside with New Hampshire when we were in southern New Hampshire is Massachusetts policies would drive people out of Massachusetts. And they went off and said, "Man, wouldn't it just be great if we had this one thing?" Right? And that was the problem that southern New Hampshire was dealing with was this large influx of people who were driven out of Massachusetts because it was too expensive to live there and it was too difficult to deal with all that stuff. And you're, 30, 45 minutes from Boston, in the southern tier area of New Hampshire, and they were just basically colonizing it and bringing all those problems with them. And then you start talking about New York. We're facing this is going to be an interesting experiment because the city is evacuating, so to
Yeah.
sell.
Oh, I
The,
saw
the
some pictures of. Well, I saw some video actually of a U-Haul in NYC that was the line stretched to the end of the block.
oh yeah, yeah. No, they're leaving. The downside is that they're going up to places like Lake Placid, which is where I was this weekend. ramming my elbow arms through other portions of my elbow arms. Uh, they go up there, and the end result is that the cost of property in the Adirondacks, the cost of property in these more remote regions is like tripling.
Damn
Uh,
gentrifiers.
yeah, right. Yeah, well, they turned the average property value of Lake Placid from $1 million buy into 3 million. Now I'll
Coming in
never have
and
a home.
ruin things for the proletariat.
Right?
Cheapers, Willikers.
Yeah. But that's one problem they're facing, and I hope they don't bring all the stuff that caused the city to go be the city
Well,
up
it is
here where
anecdotal.
we're not dealing with those problems.
This is anecdotal, but from what I'm hearing is that a lot of these people that are leaving these big cities, like leaving California for Texas, leaving New York for anywhere, leaving Portland for literally anywhere, even, they'd probably be happy to shack up with the cartels. But, a lot of these people that are leaving, from what I understand, where previously a lot of them had carried a lot of those values and kind of led to the bluing of Texas specifically, places like Austin, that's much less now. That a lot of the people that are leaving are voting differently than the places that they came from. Like, again, anecdotally, but it seems that these people have kind of learned their lesson and that they're going to try and stop these things from happening. Because if we look at things objectively, a lot of what real progressives want is basically done. I mean, there's a few things yet to be done, but the bulk of the old school progressive agenda is filled.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's not necessarily a terrible way to go, but your existence, right? I've always had this issue. When they get what they want, they still seem to linger around and generate new causes for them.
Yeah, you have to be. You got to lay down your guns, guys. When you're done with the battle, when the fight's over,
right.
It's over. You can put
So
down your guns.
That's my largest concern. Now, I'm hoping that lessons were learned, because previously it's always been kind of the boiling frog in the pot, right? You slowly heat up the water, the frog doesn't get out. But now with a whole bunch of people leaving, I'm really hoping that it's this
I mean,
absolutely
it will be an issue.
clear.
That is just a given. There are people that are going to import their values because that's just what they do. There are people that won't be able to lay behind their bag of bricks, and they'll have to carry their bag of bricks with them.
Yep.
And
I just hope it doesn't.
Seems that there's more that are deciding, why am I carrying this bag of bricks? This bag of bricks is just weighing me down. I'm just going to leave it. I'm going to go somewhere else. And if somebody wants that bag of bricks, they can pick it up. Otherwise, fuck that bag of bricks.
That's what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that it was a sudden, drastic shift, and
a
we
sea change.
Yeah, that's what I'm really hoping for.
It could be. Let's both hope.
Yep, but you know what? It's rather unfortunate that now I have to earn $3 million to retire at Lake Placid instead of $1 million. It's going to be a longer route. I'm going to have to wait for those immortality cures to kick in.
Oh, well, then you don't have to worry about retiring, though, so it all works out. And really, are you sure you want a place on Lake Placid, or are you sure you don't want something, on Olympus Mons?
I'm actually about that, and I do not want to go to Mars. I don't know. Well, so let me rephrase that. I don't want to go to Mars unless I have a way back.
Well,
I don't know. I don't know if I would
given.
be. I'm just saying, right? They haven't figured out the way back yet.
Well, I mean, it's doable.
And I think
again,
I would.
It's just money. It's all money. And
it is
infrastructure.
It is, but I don't. There's a whole lot of people who just want to send a crew there, and there's a whole who just want to go. And I suspect there's going to be a horrible tragedy of the.
Yeah, I don't want to be
12 people
during
that get left behind.
Decade or two of Mars Wild West. I've no desire for that. I'd like to go when there's, property to buy.
Maybe then. But you know what? I don't know. I think we have a gorgeous planet here. I think that we should do our best to preserve it in its as best we can. We need to obviously make exceptions for the growth of human civilization, but because otherwise, if we don't, we're going to lose it,
Well,
right?
now
Regardless,
is
you
the
lose it, you
last
lose it.
time to slam on the brakes because if we do
Right.
now, there's been too much damage done, and there's nothing that we can do to fix it. So we have to
Well,
get better technology to fix the damage. If this damage is real, then we've got to fix it, right?
it's not just that, right? Like wealth, the wealthier we are, the more land we can own, and the more land that we can afford to own, the more land that we can afford to take care of. And so there's an intrinsic link between protecting your environment and growing your wealth of your population, right? If I own something, I care about it. If I don't own it, and I can't own it, and I can never own it, why do I care?
You know, there's a lot of people that think seizing the means of this or that will make all of that suddenly reverse itself. They are woefully incorrect. But I think
All I
we've.
want is
Hmm?
to have to prove that it works once. That's all they got to do. They just got to show that it
Yeah,
actually
just.
works.
Well, that wasn't real. But anyway, I think we've pretty well covered everything we needed to this
Yep.
episode. Is there anything you want to just promote or anything before we close it out?
No, I just you asked for me to come on, and of course, I like talking to you and Craig on a regular basis. You're the only remaining bastions of reasonable discourse on Twitter, I think.
It
So I
is a
just
very
figured I'd come on.
unreasonable place. Well, thank you
It's
very much for coming on and having a
phenomenal
conversation
dumpster
with me.
fire.
It is. It is visible from space.
It is visible from space, and it burns all the colors, so there's good fumes.
It does. It is a rainbow fire.
Yep. No, I don't have anything to promote at this time. Maybe sometime in the future.
All right, cool, man. Well,
Gotta
I'd love
figure.
to have you back on again. We're
Sure.
definitely going to have to talk about the defeating the virus of age. That's
Yes.
going to be a great show. I'd love to have Craig around for that one too.
That would be great. That could be a lot of fun.
Oh, cool, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. Look forward to, well, I'll be talking with you again soon, one way or the other, but, actually
Right.
in this format. So you take it easy.
Have a
And
good day.
everybody listening, been a pleasure. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you all very much. Bye bye.